Do you have thousands of photos just sitting on a hard drive waiting to be edited and you have no idea where or how to start? Or maybe you do know how to edit your photos, but you're stuck in a rut where you're just doing the same old pattern over and over again and you've lost motivation and inspiration to keep editing your photos. Then you've found the right video. Today I'm going to show you how I edit 3 completely different photos in DxO's Photo Lab 9 and a lot of tips and tricks along the way. I'm sure this is going to help you get started with your own edits or inspire you with a few new techniques that you can try out on your own wildlife photos. This video is sponsored by DxO and I have a special discount code for you guys. If you use my code Carolina at checkout, you get 15% off all DxO software, and from November 18th to December 2nd, it will give you an extra 5% off DxO's Black Friday deals. The best part about it is that when you buy DxO softwares, it's in perpetuity, which means you don't have to subscribe, you don't have to pay again. You buy it once and then you get to keep it forever. With that said, let's get started with editing these photos. First of all, I do want to mention that DxO has great organization abilities, and I could definitely go on about that for a whole video in itself. For example, one of my favorite things is that you don't actually have to import the photos into the software. You can just quickly access them straight from the software to your hard drives or wherever you're keeping your photos, which I think is fantastic. But today I want to focus on the post-processing abilities of the software, which is what we can access in the Customize tab. So the first photo that I want to show you is this photo of a leopard right here that was taken on a very late afternoon, just after sunset. There was barely any light left. And as you can see on my settings right here and on the right hand side here is I was shooting on the 70-200 2.8 and had my aperture on 2.8 to let as much light in as possible, and then had to lower my shutter speed to 1/100th and hold really steady to be able to capture anything at all. And that gave me an ISO of 64,000. And yeah, if you don't believe me, look right here, it is 64,000. Usually when I tell people that, they are shocked and think that that's not even possible, and how can you even use a photo like that? Is it not ruined by all the noise? And yes, the noise is quite bad on this photo, but it doesn't mean it's ruined. Let me show you how. So by pressing the Customize tab up here, we'll open up the post-processing part of the DxO Photo Lab. And as you can see, when we zoom in on the photo, the noise is really bad. But trust me, that is not an issue. We can still use this photo. The whole reason that I actually found DxO was because I was researching different denoising programs and was recommended to try their Photo Pure Raw software, and I was blown away. It is absolutely incredible what the denoising can do, and it just opens up all the different possibilities of shooting late in the evenings with high ISOs like this when you just don't have another choice. So the very cool thing about Photo Lab is that the Pure Raw software is built into the program itself. And we access that by clicking this little tab right here, and then we choose which one we want to use. And for a less noisy photo, I would probably just use the standard just to kind of clean it up a little bit, sharpen it a little bit, but nothing major. But for a photo like this, we definitely need a little bit more punch than that. And their base software is the Deep Prime XD, so I'll be using that for this photo. And to see what difference this makes to the photo, we can use the loop right here and zoom in 100% to the photo, and you can see how incredible that is. It really cleans up so nicely while still retaining a lot of detail in the leopard's fur. And if I click the compare button up at the top here, we'll see the before and after, and you can really see how incredible that is. What's good to know is that the main preview that we can see behind here uses a faster, less processor-intensive algorithm to display the image. What this means is that with demanding processes like the noise reduction, the main preview is just a good approximation, but with the loop preview, we can see the fully rendered photo and what the final image will look like. But even though this looks amazing right here, we can actually take the denoising one step further and bring out even more detail from the leopard's fur. And we can do that by going to the local adjustments right here, and we can select the leopard itself by just pressing this AI selector and then hover over the leopard. The software picks up that that is what you want to select, and you just press that, and that looks like quite a perfect selection to me. Then we scroll down to the denoising part at the bottom here, and I just want to bring up the details a bit and see how much more detail we can bring out of the leopard. We can maybe bring up the luminance a little bit as well and intensify the local sharpness. And then again, using the loop here, we can zoom in and see how much detail that has brought out of the leopard's fur. That is quite incredible. And then if we press this little eye right here, we can see the before. You see how soft that still is compared to the after. Look how much detail that has been brought out. That is really quite incredible. And then viewing it in full screen here, we can see the big difference that this has made. So this is the before and after. And also looking at them side by side here, we can zoom in and really see what difference this has made. You would never believe that this photo was shot on 64,000 ISO. Now moving on to this wild dog photo right here, I want to show you my step-to-step process from start to finish of how I edit this photo. So my thoughts behind this photo is that I don't think it needs really too much. It's definitely a photo that needs more of a natural, neutral edit. What I want to do is stay in this like beige kind of orange tone. I maybe want to make the orange pop a little bit more because I do like that color. And I definitely want to straighten the photo because it is a little bit skew. And then I just want to bring out a little bit more detail from the wild dog itself. It was taken on an overcast day, so the light is a little bit too flat for my liking. So I want to make it pop a little bit and add a little bit more light to the photo to really enhance the feeling of the photo. Before I get started with anything else, I do want to add the denoise to this photo. Even though it wasn't taken at a very high ISO or anything, and it doesn't have a lot of noise, as you can see when we use the loop here and look at the wild dog's face. But it is still nice to just add a little bit of denoise to just sharpen up the photo. And even when you're taking a photo on like ISO 100, you will always have a little bit of noise there. So it's just something that I like to do on every single photo. And then I also just like to add the lens sharpness optimization as well. And I just leave those on the standard because I think they do a really good job. So just zooming in here on with the loop, we can see that the wild dog's face is already a little bit sharper, especially when you click on the compare, we can see that it just has sharpened up the face a bit, which is really nice. The next step is to crop the photo, and I like to do this before I start editing anything else because I think it affects the photo so much. If a photo is skew and I start editing exposure and color, I constantly just look at the photo and I'm like, something's off, something's not feeling right, and I just can't get into editing color and so on. So I just always start with cropping the photo, make sure my composition is perfect, and then I'll start doing everything else. We start by going into the cropping tool that's up here, and the first thing I notice is this little rock here that I want to crop away. And that already, just cropping that away, already puts the wild dog in a better composition as well. Looking at the rule of thirds here. And then I just want to straighten the photo a bit. I'm looking at the ground here to straighten it and the way the wild dog is moving, and then I just want to make sure that it stays within the frame. So I think something like that, I think that looks good. This way we have the wild dog moving into the frame more. We have a little bit more space where he's moving instead of where he's coming from. So it just helps the photo feel more balanced and we see where the wild dog is going. And we can start with using our basic tools that are right here and then move into more advanced tools after that. And I personally like to start with the white balance just to make sure that all the colors are correct in the photo before I start playing with any creative colors. So I'm just going to use the white balance color picker and then choose something that is quite white. So we'll have a look right here. And we can see that made the photo a little bit too blue for my liking. So I'm going to bring up the warmth just a little bit because I do think that looks a little bit more natural. Then moving on to exposure, I'm going to bring up the exposure just slightly to bring out more detail in the wild dog's fur here. They do have very dark fur, so I want to just bring out more details there. And then moving on to the selective tones with the highlight, midtones, shadows, and blacks. I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit and raise the midtones, bring up the shadows a little bit maybe, but then I want to bring down the black point just to keep that contrast there. Then moving on to one of my absolute favorite tools, which is the HSL sliders. And here we can control specific colors in the photo, which really opens up all sorts of creative possibilities. With this specific photo, I want to start with the orange and just saturate that a little bit. As I said, I want to make the orange pop a bit more because it felt a little bit too desaturated for my liking. But I do want to bring down the saturation in the yellow because I find that that takes over a little bit. And then up here on the color wheel, you can see that we have the yellow selected here. And we can move this part to change the hue of the yellow. So we can bring it a little bit more towards orange or a little bit more towards green. And I think definitely bringing it slightly more towards orange will help to just create that unified orange look in the photo that I'm going for. And then I also want to bring down the luminance a bit here in the orange. Again, bringing out a little bit more detail in the background and just creating that more of a deep orange that I want. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do with this photo. As you can see, it only pretty much has orange tones in it, so there isn't a lot of colors to play around with here specifically. But here, if we click on the on and off button, you can see the before and after for that tool alone. It actually has made quite a big difference to the final look. Then going up to the exposure settings up at the top, I want to find the tone curve that we have right here, just to add a little bit more contrast in the photo. And I do that by pressing on the tone curve here to lock those points in. And then I want to bring down the shadows a little bit and bring up the highlights slightly to create that S curve. And then I think maybe bringing down the mid-tones just a little bit, something like that. You can see that added actually a lot of contrast to the photo. Then I want to move on to the local adjustments, and this is where the fun starts, where we can really start playing with the light in the photo. And the first thing that I want to do is that I want to darken the bottom of the photo a little bit, and I like to do this with pretty much every single photo that I edit, and especially photos like this that are taken in more flat light. I find that it just makes the photo pop a little bit. So selecting the gradient filter right here, and then tapping from the bottom up, I'm going to move it around to maybe... You can see that the red part of the photo is where we're going to affect the photo, and I think that looks quite good. Don't be afraid to affect the animal here. I find that sometimes people want the whole animal to be super bright and the rest of the background be super, super dark, and that just creates a very unnatural look to a photo. You need the darker areas to kind of blend into the subject as well to make it look natural. And to be completely honest, the feet of the wild dog is not what I want people to be looking at. So bringing down the exposure a little bit. I usually like to bring down the mid-tones and the shadows a bit as well. Again, just for a more natural look to the dark area there. The next thing I'd like to do is pretty much the opposite and just brighten up this area right here. So I'm going to do the same thing again. Now I'm just contrasting what I just did at the bottom of the photo with the top corner of the photo, increasing the exposure a little bit, and I like to add a little bit of temperature there as well, just to kind of mimic some sunlight coming from there. Now I want to duplicate this mask and affect the same area except for the wild dog, because I want to blur that area a bit, which also just helps to enhance that sunlight feel. And I do that by adding another mask to this one, and it creates a sub-mask right here. And then I want to select using the AI tool, and I'm going to bring down to the bottom here, and here I can actually select animals, and the AI will detect the animal in the frame and create a perfect mask for it. But then now you can see that it has selected the wild dog and kind of added it to the mask, and that's not what I want. So what I need to do is invert the shape, and then you'll see how it only selects the background. So now with that done, I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom, and I'm going to add a bit of blur there to that part of the photo. And then by turning these on and off, you can see the before and after. And you can just see how this makes the light look less flat, and I find that it just creates a more interesting photo to look at. And then we can look at the before and after here and comparing them to each other. And we can either do that with the geometry, which means that the crop will be applied to the before as well, which shows us just the exposure settings and color settings that we have applied to the photo. Or we can compare it without the geometry, and then we see the crop difference as well. And now the last photo that I want to show you how I edit is one that I think will work really nicely in black and white. This was taken on the Chobe River. As you can see, I'm actually in the water. I'm on a boat, so don't stress. I'm not swimming in the water up to an elephant. But this is a really nice opportunity to get those wide angle shots because the elephants are very comfortable with the boats and they do get really nice and close. And this was taken in summer when we had overcast weather. So there's actually a lot of clouds here in the sky that I thought could really add cool texture to the photo. So I wanted to capture that, but I still wanted to keep more detail out of the elephant. So as you can see, it doesn't look like we have a lot of detail in the sky here, but let me show you how you can bring that back, especially when you photograph in RAW. You have so much detail to work with, so you can bring a lot of detail back from highlighted areas like this. As usual, I'm just going to start by denoising the photo, and then I'm going to move over to my crop. And then I'd start by just straightening the photo, something like that. And then ideally, I would like to crop away this elephant right here. But if I move in and crop him off, I end up a bit too close to this elephant, which is not ideal. So what I'm going to have to do instead is just remove him from the photo. So I'm going to keep the crop like this, and then just bring in the bottom here. Just something like that. I think that looks good. And then, as I said, I just want to remove him from the frame. So moving up here to the retouch tool, I'm going to use that to clean up this elephant right here. So starting by making the brush a little bit bigger, I'm going to use the clone instead of the repair because I think that works better for situations like this. And then move this to an area that is more similar to that area right there. And then just gonna try to match it. And by bringing up the feather, we get a better fade, so it just looks a little bit more natural. And then we can actually use this little tool right here to enlarge the brush a little bit, because I think that might be helpful here. And something like that, I think looks good. Then moving on, as I said, I think this photo will look really nice in black and white. And to make it black and white, we go to the color space right here, and then we can scroll down to the color in black and white and just press on the black and white right here. And then we have a few options to choose from, so we can see if there's any that look a little bit better. And I do think that the balanced one looked really nice. It adds a little bit more contrast to the elephant, so that looks like a good starting point. And then going back to the exposure tab, we do want to work with this a little bit. So I'm going to use the selective tones here, and I want to bring down the highlights quite a lot to just bring out more detail from the sky. But I'm going to bring up the midtones and definitely bring up the shadows, which will affect the elephant quite a lot. And again, I want to use the tone curve here to get a bit more specific with my adjustments. So I'll put out my 3 dots as usual and bring down the shadows a little bit. I'm going to raise the midtones slightly, but then again, I want to bring down the highlights to get a little bit more detail out of the sky there. I think even dropping the whites can look good in this photo, getting that faded look. And then we can add another point here and just bring down the black point a little bit, adding more contrast to the photo. And there's the before and after. You can see what a powerful tool the tone curve is. Moving on to the local adjustments, I do want to select the sky right here. So I'm going to add another mask here and then use the AI tool to select the sky here. And just by pressing on it like that, you can see I've selected it. And I want to bring down the exposure a bit here in the sky and definitely bring down the highlights. But then where the magic comes in is where we add the clear view here and we bring up the intensity there, and you can see how much detail we get out of the sky. And I also want to bring up the contrast, and again I think bringing down the exposure a bit and the highlights to something like that. Bringing down the black tone as well will just bring out a lot more detail from that sky. But then as you can see, now that we have brought out more detail here, we can also see how we've brought out these little blemishes that are actually water droplets that were on my lens as I took this photo. So obviously I don't want those there, and we're going to need to clone those out. So again, going back to the retouch tool, we just want to make the brush a little bit smaller this time. And I'm just going to use the repair this time because I think that will do a better job for these little small blemishes. So just going to paint over them right there. And there we go. I think that's it. That looks a lot better, definitely a lot cleaner now. And then going back to our local adjustments, I again want to darken the bottom here. Now we have this like grayish tone throughout the photo, which definitely can be a way to go, but I don't think that's really what I want with this photo. So I'm gonna just darken the bottom here a little bit. And then I want to add a little bit more texture and contrast on the elephant itself. So I'm gonna add another mask, and again select the AI, and then just select the elephant right here. And there we go, a perfect mask for the elephant. So then bringing up the contrast, and the micro contrast will increase the texture a bit in the elephant, which definitely will help. We can also go down and help bring up the sharpness a little bit here. And then using the loop to zoom in here, we can see what a difference that's made to the elephant and how much detail we still have here. Again, comparing the before and after, we can slide back and forth here. You can see we've brought out so much more detail from the sky, which really enhances the photo. And then obviously cleaning up the elephant in the background there, and then all the water droplets that were on my lens just obviously makes the photo look a lot cleaner and nicer. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial of these 3 different photos, and I hope they've inspired you to get started with your own wildlife photo edits. And don't forget to use my discount code Carolina for 15% off year-round. And during Black Friday, from the 18th of November to the 2nd of December, you'll get an extra 5% off on top of DxO's Black Friday special. Thanks for watching, and thanks again to DxO for sponsoring this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.